Now, before I get started, I do want to let you know that this video is actually the second part of a series that I'm doing about the Force. And though I'd recommend checking out the first video in the series before watching this one, and a link to it will be in the description below, it isn't necessarily required viewing, and mainly in that video I establish what balance in the Star Wars galaxy truly is, and why the Sith or other dark side users are not needed to achieve nor maintain the balance within the Force, even when there are potentially thousands of Jedi in the galaxy, like we saw during the prequels. And the very quick and simple reason for that is because Jedi exist for one purpose and one purpose alone: to maintain the balance by listening to the will of the Force itself. In theory, they should never act of their own accord, and only do what they must to see that balance is restored or maintained. Hence, no matter how many there may be, they don't unbalance the Force. And it's because of this simple and singular reason that I've never been a fan of terms such as gray Jedi or dark Jedi, because calling someone a dark Jedi is like calling someone a meat-eating vegetarian. If you're a vegetarian and you start eating steaks, you don't then put yourself into a strange subcategory and try to in any way, shape, or form cling to this idea that you're still a vegetarian. Rather, you're no longer adhering to the one simple principle that made you a vegetarian in the first place. So simply put, you're just not one anymore. Just like a Jedi who does anything but heed the will of the Force and act only to maintain balance is no longer adhering to the one thing that made them a Jedi. Because being a Jedi is much more than a cool title that you can earn. It's a devotion to a way of life and a belief. It's following a strict code and putting aside all attachments, all wants and desires, in an effort to never use the Force on your own behalf or for your own gain, but to instead remain calm and able to hear the will of the Force and carry out that will in all situations. Yoda puts it best in The Empire Strikes Back when Luke asks, "How will I know the good side from the bad?" And Yoda replies, "You will know when you are calm, at peace." In other words, acting rashly or based on your own feelings or emotions or desires risks embracing the dark side and unbalancing the Force. When Yoda goes on to tell Luke that once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny, he's actually telling Luke that once you start acting selfishly, once you start trying to put things the way you desire by using the Force, you risk falling into an endless loop or trap, where one bad, selfish decision leads to you having to make another one to fix the previous one when that goes wrong, which is basically what happened to Anakin Skywalker. Now, many people interpret these words by Yoda to also mean that once you let the dark side consume you, it's impossible to ever come back. But clearly, Anakin disproves that at the end of Return of the Jedi. Instead, and my friend Gregory B. was the first one to give me this analogy, think of the dark side as a drug. Once you use it for the first time and achieve a desired result, it's very tempting to do that again, until you get to the point where it just becomes easier when faced with any type of dilemma to use the dark side to fix it. Nor can you imagine or want to imagine an existence without using it, and your biggest fear becomes, as Palpatine says to Anakin in Revenge of the Sith, losing that power. And all this again relates directly with another quote by Yoda taken from The Empire Strikes Back, when Luke asks if the dark side is stronger, and Yoda replies that no, it's quicker, easier, more seductive, which basically means it's easier when faced with a problem to get angry and let that anger fuel a rash decision that may immediately solve your problem, but potentially create several more for you down the road. And it's easier to do that than it is to stay calm, to think logically and look ahead, or heed the will of the Force, and act in a way that is in the best interest of maintaining balance and goes beyond the immediate desires of one's self. For example, Anakin turning on Mace Windu in Revenge of the Sith was a selfish decision, and in the short term was supposed to help him save Padme's life. But long term, she obviously still perished, and his actions helped Palpatine secure power. And by now you might be thinking, this is fine and all, Thor, but what does this have to do with balanced Force users, or gray Force users, or those who in theory wield both the dark and the light, yet do not fully commit or devote themselves to either side? Well, hopefully after my little preamble, you're beginning to understand how difficult it is for such a thing to be possible. Not that I'm saying it's impossible. And the first thing we must do is ask what's the point of walking the fine line between the dark and the light in the first place, other than the fact that it sounds pretty cool in a story. Because someone who is Force sensitive that is naturally more inclined to be selfish and to use the Force for their own gain or agenda is likely going to find little merit in ever using the light side and taking the time to achieve the discipline required to use it to its fullest extent. In other words, why take the roundabout way when the quick and easy path is available? What's there to stop the user from fully embracing the dark side other than perhaps for an internal moral dilemma on the user's part, or knowing and being bothered by the fact that they're doing wrong by using the dark side to get their way, and oftentimes at the expense of others? And that's a dilemma that's likely going to fade away quickly as they're consumed by the dark side after frequent use. The same way a drug addict who may have once been a good person, in time, will likely completely lose their moral compass and even steal or hurt loved ones to get their fix. And again, Anakin Skywalker and the things he was willing to do after he fell to the dark side is an example of how quickly a good person can completely lose themselves to the dark side. On the other hand now, if you have someone who generally wants to use the Force to do good and to help others or do what they deem is right most of the time, and they're willing to use the dark side to achieve this, then there are several issues with that as well. Not the least of which would be that, without heeding the will of the Force itself, like the Jedi do, and instead acting when and where they think is best, they could end up doing more harm than good. I once again point to Anakin, who wanted to save his wife, which seems like a noble cause that no one would blame him for. But the consequences that resulted in him doing what he thought was best were disastrous. There's also the problem of the dark side requiring strong emotion to wield effectively. So in one sense, a Force user intending to do good while using the dark side would have to stay calm enough to rationally judge a situation and discern the right course of action. They'd also have to have powerful enough emotions to use the dark side well. And as I think most of us will attest, the more emotion we have about something, the less likely we are to make a rational decision concerning it. And I'd also have to imagine that the level of discipline required to quickly tap into the dark side and use it effectively without falling to it or being consumed by it would be about on par with the level of discipline required to use the light side to its fullest extent, thus begging the question of why tap into the dark side at all if you're that strong and proficient with the light. I mean, if you can be powerful enough with the light to accomplish your objective, why risk messing around with the dark side and all the pitfalls that go along with it, like possibly being consumed by it? And sadly, the best answer most would probably come up with is that the dark side powers are more effective. But is that really the case? Master Yoda, for example, undoubtedly the most powerful Jedi we've seen in the canon, would have no doubt laughed at the idea that he could augment his light side powers by dabbling in the dark side and using the abilities offered by it. And that's because the dark and the light are not only equal in strength, but two sides of the exact same coin or force or energy field. In other words, being strong with both sides of the Force doesn't mean you have twice the power of someone who's strong with just one side. You simply know how to use a singular energy source or the Force in two different ways, in two very opposite ways that would be impossible to wield effectively simultaneously. And that's because whereas using the light side is allowing the Force to flow through you to help partially control your actions, as Obi-Wan tells Luke in A New Hope, using the dark side is corrupting the Force to bend it entirely to your own will. As Palpatine tells Anakin in Revenge of the Sith, the dark side is a pathway to many abilities, some considered to be unnatural. And these unnatural abilities cause a corruption of the Force and disturb the natural order of things, and, of course, cause the imbalance the Jedi fight so hard to prevent. Most Sith, for example, strive to cheat death and to achieve immortality while also gaining unlimited power. When Obi-Wan tells Anakin that only a Sith deals in absolutes, he's telling him that only Sith seek to control all things, or things that should be beyond the control of living beings, such as control over life and death and the fates of other beings. Contrary to popular belief, the Jedi do not seek to stop or destroy the dark side itself, only those who wield it. They accept that the dark side and the light need to coexist, and without one, you can't have the other. And the goal of the Jedi, again, is to make sure the balance between these two is always maintained. They are not champions of the light as much as they are keepers of the balance. Now, I'm not trying to completely destroy the idea of balanced or gray Force users here, or the idea that there may be those who walk the line between the dark and the light, and, at least to some degree, can wield both sides effectively. I'm simply saying that, believe it or not, and you can certainly take to the comments and disagree with me, but I don't expect gray Force users, for lack of a better name, to ever become a big thing in the new canon, much like they were in the old expanded universe. And yes, we do have things like the Bendu in the new canon, who claims to be the one in the middle, and I will be making a video on him soon enough, but don't be surprised if he's going to be a very rare exception, not a rule. And keep in mind, he was presented in a way to show that he is clearly something very old, powerful, and unique. I also know many think that this new trilogy will end with Rey and Kylo Ren finding a balance together by using both the dark and the light sides. But I again remind you that using the dark side causes corruption and imbalance in the Force. This, believe it or not, like it or not, is a hard and fast rule that, if changed, fundamentally changes everything about Star Wars. That being said, accepting the dark side has its place and purpose, as the Jedi already do, and even Luke in The Last Jedi talks about the need for powerful light and powerful dark, is something that I think will get highlighted even further in the final chapter of this trilogy. In other words, when the credits on Episode 9 roll, I expect, or hope, that pretty much everyone will have a clear understanding of what balance in Star Wars truly is, and will know that the Force is in that state. Lastly, I do want to make it clear that there are probably countless semi-Force sensitive beings in the Star Wars galaxy, or those not quite strong enough with the Force to ever become Jedi or Sith, that can and do wield both sides of the Force to some extent. Most of these beings probably don't even realize they're Force sensitive and think that they're just lucky. Others might understand that they're Force sensitive, but just don't have the connection with the Force to ever really develop abilities, if you will. While others yet may have been strong enough to become Jedi, but never got discovered for whatever reason, and have one way or another become semi-proficient Force users that may use light and dark frequently without falling to the dark side. My main argument here isn't that no one could or does use both sides of the Force. It's that any powerful Force user, on the level of a true Sith, Jedi, or even greater, who can wield both sides of the Force without succumbing to the darkness, should be an extremely rare thing, or you risk undermining many of the core principles of the Force and Star Wars itself. If you show that it's not all that uncommon for someone to just tap into the dark side on a whim with either no repercussions for themselves or consequences to the greater whole, then you begin to belittle the epic struggle against the dark side many characters have faced. I mean, if the dark side can be used like just some type of power source, instead of a commitment to not only a way of life, but a line of thinking, then you risk turning the franchise into something more akin to the superhero genre. Falling to the dark side should always remain the ultimate worst fate of a character in Star Wars, even more so than death. In my opinion, using the dark side needs to be likened more to selling one's soul to the devil for power than something that can be dabbled in and used to perform cool abilities unattainable to those who otherwise only commit to the light side. Using the dark side and bending the Force to your own will is a violation of the natural order of things. It is the most selfish act one can commit and is the same as declaring that your wants and desires supersede what is best for the whole. And though Grey Force users sound cool in theory, and if done right and used sparingly, can probably make for some really interesting and intriguing stories going forward, it should never be implied that using the dark side, even for the right reasons, does not come without a cost. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about Grey Force users and what place they should have in the new canon going forward. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.